Bloodborne is an action role-playing game made by Japanese developer From Software, brought to you by the same creative team that made Demon's Souls and Dark Souls. The story is set in a Lovecraft meets Cronenberg meets Dickens meets Bram Stoker dreamscape that is a fantastic example of the cosmic horror genre, and that's why we're going to talk about how the game's happiest ending is actually its most depressing. It's become conventional to talk about games with multiple endings in terms of the good ending versus the bad ending, or the good ending versus the evil ending, and so on and so forth, because most games with multiple endings do tend to have a fairly unambiguous hierarchy, usually with the optimal ending being more difficult, with additional steps required or just a generally superior grasp of the game as a whole needed. Jumping through various hoops to save every secondary character results in an ending where almost everyone lives happily ever after. The end. Bloodborne, however, inverts this typical relationship, providing three endings that on a surface level are happier the less effort you put into the game. Story-wise, the game doesn't branch much through the bulk of its playtime. Approaching things in a different order or making key decisions will change the fate of various individuals, but the overall plot remains ultimately fixed. It is intentionally obtuse, bordering on inscrutable, something that is 100% appropriate for the cosmic horror genre. Even when the reader has the big picture, they are still left with the gnawing sensation that this big picture is but a postage stamp sized piece of a much bigger picture that they are not and never will be privy to. So the plot of Bloodborne starts long before the game begins, and it intentionally paints only a vague sketch of events that happened over the course of hundreds of years. Ages and ages ago, there was a civilization called the Pthumerians, who had a connection with the Old Ones, otherworldly beings of immense power who they worshipped as gods. Queen Yharnam, their last ruler, had a particularly powerful connection to these beings, but things started to go bad, so the Pthumerians retreated into their catacombs and sealed themselves away. Over time, a town, named Yharnam after the queen, was founded on the ruins, and explorers eventually found their way into the catacombs, where they discovered dark secrets. These dark secrets led to the foundation of the Academy of Byrgenwerth, built to study the things found in the labyrinth, and the rise of a cult called the Choir, who in turn used that knowledge to develop something called blood ministrations. By doping blood with various kinds of alien fluids referred to as the Old Blood, the Choir was able to perform healing miracles, give people superpowers, tap into arcane energies, and a bunch of other stuff. One dude, Willem, the head researcher at Byrgenwerth, figured this was probably a bad plan, but his protege Lawrence decided to roll with it and founded the Healing Church as a way to distribute the blood ministrations far and wide, believing that it would evolve mankind to a higher level of being. Publicly, the Healing Church uses the ministrations to perform miracles, but privately, the Choir is using them as a way to strengthen their contact with the Old Ones under the guidance of a being named Ebritas. Either way, blood ministrations are a hit, and Yharnam grows into a sprawling Dickensian metropolis, drawing people in from near and far. However, Willem was right, and the whole process winds up turning random people into monsters every cosmic event or so. The people of Yharnam, however, with their entire society revolving around the Healing Church and these blood ministrations, considers this to be an acceptable side effect, and a couple dudes in the church's workshop, Ludwig and Gehrman, came up with a simple solution: just to hunt down anyone who turns into a werewolf and kill them. Thus, the hunt was born. In the present, you play as a character who has come to Yharnam to get blood ministration to cure some unspecified problem, and in exchange for the cure, you are roped into joining the hunt. Over the course of the game, you discover that the hunt is basically a covert way of maintaining the status quo, because every time a Great One tries to reproduce, that's what triggers everyone turning into monsters. So the job of the hunters is to kill monster people, yes, but the main goal is to kill the new baby Old One in order to prolong humanity's existence just a little bit longer. It's even more intricate than that. The lore notes scattered around the world pepper in dozens of different individuals and a handful of various factions, each with their own goals and complex relationships to one another. And this is also where things start to go to the weird side. See, like with a lot of cosmic horror, much of the logic of Bloodborne is founded on the idea that people are simply incapable of seeing things that are too alien, that a giant eldritch abomination could be hanging out in the middle of town, and even though it would be right in front of you, you have no frame of reference to comprehend it, so your brain would simply not know how to process it and would just blank it out. By extension, the more you know about the truth of the cosmos, the more you're able to see, because you now have a frame to put it in. The downside is that this shift in perspective leads to madness, or at the very least a disconnection with the ordinary in such a way that most would interpret as madness. With this in mind, a large portion of the hunt takes place in this kind of altered state of perception, with the hunter seeing, fighting, and interacting with things that aren't normally visible. And that brings us to the endings of the game. After the player survives the night and completes the hunt, they return to the hunter's dream, a pocket dimension that serves as the game's central hub, and are told to go talk with Gehrman. Now, Gehrman's been sitting around for the entire game as a kindly old, if slightly perverted, mentor figure.
You're welcome to use whatever you find. Even the doll, should it please you.
But if the player has been paying attention and snooping around, then they've pieced together that the dude should have to be pushing like 150, 200 years by now. He was an original hunter, so something's up. You go to talk to Gehrman, he congratulates you on a job well done, and this is where the game splits into its 3 endings. The game offers you a choice: to submit or to resist. If you submit to Gehrman, he executes you in the dream, and you wake up the following morning back in the real world to a new sunrise on a new day. If you resist, then you're forced to fight Gehrman. After his defeat, an entity approaches you, picks you up, and you black out, waking up in Gehrman's wheelchair as the new Gehrman, the new keeper of the dream, the new director of the hunt. However, if you jump through a bunch of hoops throughout the game, collecting pieces of the old ones and consuming them, then you resist the moon presence, fight it, and wake up as a squid creature. You have become an infant old one yourself. Okay, so if the 3 endings are wake up as a squid, wake up as a slave, and wake up to a new sunrise, how is the happiest ending actually the worst ending? Well, it's because of knowledge and understanding. The sunrise ending is tragic because of what it costs. As Gehrman tells you before your execution, you wake up having forgotten everything about the hunt, everything you have learned about the old ones, the healing church, the choir, the truth about Yharnam and Byrgenwerth, the fact that humanity's most powerful institutions are being steered by cosmic forces that have their own unintelligible agendas and conflicts that routinely wreak havoc and destruction on society. That the one institution that seems to fight for the protection of humanity, the Hunters, is itself the construct of some cosmic being, that humanity is just a pawn in an alien civil war. Your Hunter gets to go on to live a long, happy life in a doomed world. This is so thematically poignant that this comes at the end of a Soulsborne game. Gameplay-wise, the player has spent hours and hours up to this point being taught through experience how much it sucks to get taken out by some unseen, unstoppable thing. Most of the player's first half hour in the Nightmare of Mensis, the final major chunk of the game, is going to be spent yelling, "What's even killing me?" as the player is bombarded by insanity rays from this lighthouse. And that's the tragedy of the happy ending. You're doomed, but you don't even know how doomed you are. In order to go back to a normal life, all that insight needs to be taken away, or else you would still see the things that lurk around the corners of reality, which would ultimately drive you mad, or to something others would interpret as madness. The only way to be happy in the world of Bloodborne is to be ignorant of reality. Conversely, the best ending is itself bittersweet, with the Hunter gaining incomprehensible power, being evolved beyond the limitations of the human form, but at the cost of the last remaining vestiges of their humanity. As with all Soulsborne games, there's an element of futility in each ending, a cycle that the player is ultimately incapable of breaking away from. If the player accepts Gehrman's offer, the cycle of the hunt continues, because the Hunter has forgotten everything about its true nature. If the player rejects Gehrman's offer, the Hunter simply replaces him, and the hunt continues with the Hunter compelled to participate, a slave to the cycle. If the player rejects the offer and defeats the moon presence, then the Hunter transcends into a thing that has no reason to care about humanity or the fate of humans. The exact outcome of this scenario is more ambiguous than the others, but chances are it doesn't turn out smashingly for the common folk of the world. And this is part of what makes Bloodborne such a good example of its genre. It's the faithfulness to the kinds of existential dread, the sense of futility that makes cosmic horror not just scary, but haunting. Because the longer you think about it, the more you accept that you should, indeed, fear the old blood.